Begin today's webinar. And I'd like to welcome everybody to the July 14th NCN webinar. And today's topic is going to be the CDFI Equitable Recovery Program. In today's webinar, NCN welcomes CDFI Fund Senior Advisor Dan Aiello, and he'll provide an overview of the CDFI Fund's Equitable Recovery Program. The FY22 funding round recently opened for the program, which will provide approximately $1.73 billion in awards to Treasury CDFIs, certified CDFIs, in response to the economic impacts of COVID. Through the CDFI ERP, the CDFI Fund will provide awards to CDFIs to expand lending, grant making, investment activities in low to moderate income communities, and to borrowers, including minorities, that have significant unmet capital or financial services needs and were disproportionately impacted by the COVID impact. And two, enable CDFIs to build organizational capacity and acquire technology, staff, and other necessary tools to accomplish the activities under the CDFI ERP. The deadline for the program is August 23rd. So Dan, I don't want to waste any of your valuable time, so I'm going to let you go ahead and kick it off and give us an overview.
Thanks for having me, Pete, and Native CDFI Network. I appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you guys and answer any questions you have about the program. I am just going to start with a couple opening remarks around the structure of the program. Can everyone hear me okay? My audio is okay? Give me a thumbs. All right, good. The CDFI Equitable Recovery Program is kind of a companion piece to the Rapid Response Program. They were created in the same legislation. As Pete mentioned, this is a program that's targeted a little more narrowly than RRP, specifically trying to drive lending and investment into low to moderate income communities that were disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So as a result of that aim, there are some different eligibility components and rules for the CDFI ERP program. As with RRP, in order to be eligible for a CDFI ERP award, you have to be a certified CDFI as of the date that the NOPA was published, which was June 24th, 2022. This program also requires 2 years of audited financial statements as an eligibility component. Unless you're regulated, in which case, if you're filing your call reports, that requirement is waived. Consistent with our other programs that do require audits. The other kind of big component is you have to be able to demonstrate a track record of doing at least 30% of your historical loans and investments to what we're calling ERP eligible geographies. And these ERP eligible geographies have two primary components. One is a list of census tracts that's on our website, which has, so the list of census tract is based on some analysis that we've done to determine areas that have suffered disproportionate COVID impact compared to the rest of the country. Obviously, COVID hit all parts of the country like in a very disruptive way. But we're looking particularly at census tracts that were hit the worst in terms of death, economic impact, and other things based on the data we had available. And then these census tracts also need to be low to moderate income census tracts. So those census tracts are out there. Also, all native areas are CDFI eligible census tracts. And the definition we have for native areas is, just going to read it. Native areas is defined as Alaska Native Village statistical areas, federal American Indian reservations, Hawaiian homelands, joint use areas, off-reservation trust lands, Oklahoma tribal statistical areas, state American Indian reservations, state designated tribal statistical areas, and tribal designated statistical areas. And those are all defined terms by the US Census Bureau. And so the reason we could not incorporate the native areas into the census tract that we have on our website is because native areas often cross census boundaries, don't align neatly. So couldn't reconcile those two shapes. So a big component of the eligibility for this program is that you have 30% of your historical activities in the last 5 years in these ERP eligible geographies. So that is a little bit of work for folks to figure out, which we recognize. And so in order to help facilitate that a little bit, we have provided some tools. So I'm going to share my screen and just kind of walk through what's available on our website. All right, so let me share my screen. This is Internet Explorer, share. Hopefully everyone has this available. All right. Okay, so this is the CDFI Funds website, and I've navigated to the ERP page. So there are a couple reference points I want you to be aware of. One is the list of ERP eligible census tracts. So this is a Excel file just of census tracts and indicates whether or not they meet the ERP eligible criteria. It doesn't include native areas. So the native area information is located in our community impact mapping system, which you can navigate to by clicking on the tools and resources button, and then clicking on the SIMS mapping tool. Go to the public viewer, just because then you won't have to log into AMOS. Click ERP. And layers, you can see that the native areas layer is turned on, as well as eligible census tracts. So I'm going to zoom into some area where I know both layers will appear. So you can see here, there is some overlap, which is demonstrated by this cross-hatching. But anything that's either green or blue is an eligible geography. So I believe the blue layer is the native areas. Yeah, so if I turn that off, that turns on and off. And then the green layer is the eligible census tracts. So that is available. Native CDFIs can still demonstrate the 30% either, by activity in native areas or by regular activity in ERP eligible census tracts. So it's not just because you're native CDFIs that you need to demonstrate 30% of activity in eligible in native areas. So it's either type of geography. So if you want to look up an address, you can do that. The only address I know off the top of my head is our office building. So this is where the CDFI fund is. I click this point and I see that this census tract that the CDFI fund is headquartered in is actually an ERP eligible geography. For reasons that are not totally clear. But that's how I would look at, and the same thing, you could look up an address and see if it's listed in one of the native areas as well. I'm sure we'll get some questions about this, so I'm gonna probably come back to this later. The other thing that I also want to make sure folks know is available is under the CDFI ERP program. There is a way to do what's called bulk geocoding, which is upload a bunch of addresses and determine if they're in ERP eligible census tracts. Unfortunately, it only worked for the census tract data because we're using existing functionality that was already built in AMIS for TLR reporting. And so that functionality didn't encompass native areas, and we were unable, both from a time perspective and technical perspective, to expand it. But this manual will explain to you how to do that if that's something you want to do if you have a large number of addresses. So what I would suggest in order to save time, if you do have a significant number of addresses, would be to follow this bulk address geocoding guidance and determine which addresses are located in ERP eligible geographies. So the output of this is going to be what census tract an address is located in. And then you need to cross-reference those census tracts with this ERP eligible geographies list. And then for addresses you discover aren't in ERP eligible census tracts, you could then look those up separately to determine if they're in native areas. That might be more time efficient than trying to look up all your addresses individually. Because as you saw on the screen, there is a lot of overlap between, we know at the CDFI fund that native communities were disproportionately hard hit by COVID-19, which is part of the reason native areas are specifically included in ERP eligible geographies, but they're just going to be overlap based on the metrics we're using between those geographies. So that is kind of my overview of the geographic part. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and then I'm going to probably say a couple more things. And then I got some questions in advance from Kristen that I thought I'd just try to respond to. And then I can never remember how to turn off share. That doesn't do it. Pause share. There we go. Stop share. Okay. You'd think 2.5 years in, I know how to do all the things on Zoom, but you'd be wrong. Okay. Sorry. Let me just find my place again in kind of my notes. So we covered eligibility in the geographies, kind of similar to our other programs. There's a requirement that you submit both an SF424 and an AMIS application, and that you be in compliance with your existing CDFI awards, allocations, and bond loan agreements. This program also incorporates AAT, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with from the FA and the NACA program. So that's one piece of due diligence that will be done. A couple other just housekeeping items. The awards will be provided in the form of a grant. The minimum award amount is $500,000 and the maximum is $15 million, or 3 times the applicant's average on balance sheet financial products close in the last 5 years, whichever is less. So if you are a small organization that does a low volume and say you've only closed $300,000 in loans in the last 5 years, that's okay. You would still be eligible to apply for the minimum award of $500,000. So everyone who meets the other eligibility requirements is eligible to apply for the minimum award. And then if you have a larger volume, you may be eligible to apply for a larger award. The eligible uses of the award are broadly similar to the FA program, financial product services, development services, loan loss reserves, capital reserves, and then some operational support activities like compensation, travel costs, training, equipment, supplies. The one difference is you can use this program to make grants to other organizations, or I guess individuals, like if you wanted to provide down payment assistance grants, that is something you could do with this program as well. There are some limitations on the award. For any award size, you can't use more than 25% of the award for financial services and development services combined. There's also a limitation on the amount that you can use for operational support activities. In general, it's either $666,000 or 15% of the award, so long as 15% of the award does not exceed $400,000. There's also a requirement, and this is pretty important, that you use 90% of your award dollars for activities in ERP eligible geographies. So you need to be prepared to do that. I'm gonna go in now to the questions that I got in advance. And if Pete and Kristen, if you're comfortable, I'm happy to just read them.
Yeah,
Read the question and provide the answer. All right. So the first question we got was, what if an applicant's A133 audit for 2021 is not fully complete by June 30th? And so we actually have guidance coming out in the form of an amendment to the NOFA. I think it will come out tomorrow. There'll be an announcement. It may be available already for public inspection on the Federal Register's website that will basically provide guidance on how to complete this. If you have an A133 audit that's not fully complete, or if your audited financial statements just in general, whether A133 or not, for 2021 aren't fully complete. The ERP list does not include all native areas. Does this mean native CDFIs will need to enter their individual addresses in the ERP system to determine? So I think I talked about this when I talked through the data resources. So there certainly is a fair amount of overlap between ERP eligible census tracts and native areas, but there are some areas that aren't overlapping. So if you can use the tools that we have to kind of determine which transactions are in ERP eligible geographies, and then you're dealing with a much smaller subset of your transactions that you may need to determine if they're in native areas. Of course, depending on, where you're lending and things of that nature, you may already know if your loans are in native areas, like if all of your lending is in certain geographies that you're familiar with, you may not need to do that. We got a question, could an emerging CDFI partner with a certified one in order to participate in the program? So yes, you could have a form of a partnership. You could not submit a joint application. So the certified CDFI would need to apply on its own behalf and only using its own track record. So it couldn't incorporate the activities of an emerging CDFI. But you could discuss the partnership as part of your strategy to reach certain populations in that application. We need to be a little careful because we don't want to create a sub-recipient relationship between the certified CDFI and the emerging CDFI. So if you're contemplating such a partnership, feel free to reach out to us via service request, and we can get on the phone and maybe talk through more specific guidance. The other thing that I would just highlight here is you could, for example, use the funds probably to provide a grant to, like a certified CDFI could provide a grant to an emerging CDFI for various purposes related to that CDFI's business operations, I believe, under the terms of the program, or could provide a loan or an investment. What would get challenging is if you wanted to transfer a portion of your ERP grant to an emerging CDFI to make loans on behalf of the CDFI partner. That's where we get into complicated issues around federal grant regulations and subrecipients that we would like to avoid, and you would probably like to avoid as well. So if that's something you're contemplating, feel free to reach out to us for more conversation about the specifics. So what is the likelihood of the application deadline being extended? I would say there is a high likelihood. Look for another announcement about that on our website, probably tomorrow. There's something coming in the Federal Register as well in the coming days. I'm not going to say anything else about it at that point today. For now, is there any flexibility in the 30% serving low-income census tracts over the last 5 years that needs to be met as a requirement to be eligible to participate? So it's 30% in ERP eligible geographies, which are generally low to moderate income census tracts. And no, unfortunately, there's not any flexibility that has been established as a hard eligibility requirement, because we believe that the purpose of the program is to, part of the congressional purpose of the program is to direct the money to specific areas within the country that have been particularly negatively impacted by COVID, based on the best data analysis that we could do. I don't say that at all to minimize the negative impacts of COVID on areas that may not fall within ERP eligible geographies. So one of the requirements is documentation of lending for the last this is a question. One of the requirements is documentation of lending data for the last 5 years and whether loans were provided to individuals or businesses. If the loan was provided to a tribe, how should it be categorized? So we're consulting with our colleagues at the FA and NACA program to try to get some guidance on how they treat loans from CDFIs to tribes or tribal enterprises. Our goal is to be consistent with that. So we will try to release a supplemental FAQ covering this topic once we're done figuring that out. We've got a second question about loans to small businesses and asking if a loan to a tribe is a loan to a small business. And if you're making a loan to a tribal enterprise, you use total tribal revenue to determine the size or revenue from the tribe's project that's being financed. As I alluded to before, we're just trying to consult with the FA and NACA folks to make sure that we're being consistent here with their approaches to these issues. But I can say, if you are lending to a tribal enterprise or a tribal project, you can use the revenue from the project, not from the tribe as a whole, to determine whether that enterprise or project would be a small business. And then there's a question about whether SIMs include state designated tribal statistical areas and tribal designated statistical areas in qualified native areas. If not, where do we find those? So we do. I will say, I believe the data layer we have is from 2010 and was released by the Census Bureau as part of their 2010 census package. If there are areas that have been added since then, maybe in an updated package, please feel free to reach out to us directly. I think we are still incorporating, we're still figuring out our plan. By we, I mean the CDFI fund is figuring out its plan for incorporating the 2020 census data into our data releases and packages. So I anticipate we will have that at some point in time, but we did not have it at the time this program was launched. So if there's something that got added between 2010 and 2020 that you think should be in SIMS but isn't, please feel free to reach out and we can have that conversation and talk to our data folks and see if that's the case and provide guidance on that topic. I'm just unclear personally how much these areas change over a 10-year decennial period, whether the boundaries are relatively fixed or whether there's kind of a constant updating from release to release. So with that having been said, I've gone through all of the questions I got in advance. And so I'm happy to do the chat questions, or Tristan, if you want to kind of filter, however you want to do this. I don't want to step on any toes here.
Yeah, we do have a few in the chat, so we can go through some of those and then we can open it up if folks want to chat with you a little more directly on here. So it definitely, there are quite a few questions around the audit situation. So you've answered some of them, but I think it probably, because there is so many questions about it, it probably bears it's worth repeating some information. So one of them is clarification. Is there a waiver for the audit requirement currently?
So there is not a waiver for the audit requirement currently. So the requirement is to have 2 years of audited financial statements. What we will be issuing is guidance on, like, if your audit for the most recent fiscal year is not ready, or if there's been a delay in your audit, you'll be able to substitute 2 older audits for the most recent audit. But that was a decision made kind of based on the size of the awards and what we anticipate some of the reporting and compliance requirements to be.
Okay. And then next related audit question for those on a December 31 fiscal year. Next year, would they need their audited financials by the end of March 31st?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah, for those, sure, for those that are on the December fiscal end of year, would they need to have their files audited by March 31st then next year?
No, it's standard. So
for this past year, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. So there would be standard reporting timelines for audits for all of our awards going forward. So it's typically 6 months for a financial audit, and then 9 months if you have an A133 audit. And there are certainly sometimes audits are late, and there are ways to work with compliance about those requirements, but those would be the standard timelines.
Sure. Okay. And then one more related. This is an individual that says we're a small native CDFI and are not required to have audits. So can we still apply if we have not had any?
So you could not apply directly. There may be opportunities to work with or partner with other CDFIs, as I answered in the partnership question, in ways that would bring this funding to your community. But there was a decision made to require audits as part of the eligibility for the program. So that is a requirement.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then someone else is asking, would a review be acceptable instead of a full audit?
So that's a good question. I'm not sure if we're working on an FAQ for that or not. So I think we are looking for a full audit, but I'll double check and see if that is something we're covering in the supplemental FAQs whenever those are released.
Okay, great.
And so,
moving on. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, if you feel like I didn't totally answer your question, please just feel free to submit a service request, and we can follow up in more detail later. I don't want to misspeak in this forum and have to walk something back, because that's very hard to do, because there are 34 people on the call and you all will have heard it, and then you'll all tell other people. So I'm trying to be circumspect. So I don't want folks to feel like I'm brushing them off. Definitely feel free to follow up if you felt like my answer was insufficient. So that's just kind of my blanket thing. So I'm not, I'm trying to be as helpful as possible, but it's a new program. So certain questions require some research, and I want to make sure we provide accurate information as much as possible.
Yeah, we appreciate that, Dan. And we, you already know we're recording this. So We can send out a recording as well to you, just so you have a reminder of some of these things as well. And make sure you have that list of questions for sure. Okay, so there's just another set of questions that have popped up related to the census tract issue. So here's the first one. For compliance purposes, how will native CDFIs attest that ERP loans fell within native areas without census tracts or the geocoding, especially if there's a large number of transactions?
So that is probably still being worked out, but so the question is how would you attest? So what you can do, even the bulk geocoder will provide you XY coordinates, which you can use to place an address or a location in any type of geographic locating software. So going forward, I do think we're going to need to have conversations internally and whether it's necessary or feasible to expand our existing bulk geocoding functionality to include native areas. I don't totally know where we will land on that. In general, if you want to be safe, I'm not sure how much of a burden this is, and we will provide more. Let me preface this by saying we'll be providing more detailed guidance on compliance and reporting when we get closer to that. SIMS is always an available resource. It is something that can be accessed by the public and everyone. So if you wanted anyone, even like loan officers or whoever, can access the system and look up an address and see if it's in a native area. So maybe one option internally, just to protect yourself, might be to say, if we get an ERP award as part of, if you're making loans using the ERP funds, one of the things we want to include in that loan file is someone having looked up in SIMS the location of the address. I'm just saying that as a potential suggestion, but we will obviously providing more detailed guidance and potentially more tools in our system, once we get closer to announcing awards and releasing the agreement and reporting requirements.
Okay, great. All right, here's another related geography question. So is the 30% plus historic lending in native or eligible geographies a yes, no for eligibility? Or does a larger historic lending percentage result in a more competitive application?
So it's just a yes, no. It does not necessarily result in a more competitive application. So if you look at our notice of funds availability, there's a part of the NOFA section 5 that kind of goes through, there's a table in there that goes through the competitive evaluation factors. So that's larger percentage historically is not necessarily in there, So it's really just a yes, no funding. And the idea behind that is that, since there is a requirement to use the awards in these geographies, we're looking to provide awards to groups that can demonstrate some sort of minimal, substantial but not majority of their activity. They have a substantial presence in these geographies already that tell us that they can reach these communities, because we don't want to provide awards to folks who have never worked in these communities before, because that could potentially lead to compliance issues and other issues down the road. So, but it's just a yes, no test.
Great. All right, here's a different topic.
Okay.
Since the maximum award size is 15 million, assuming the ERP award will not impact the $5 million cap in NACA, is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that is correct. Confirm that, but yeah, I mean, because that $5 million cap is not just for NACA, but for all FA grants. So I think we'd run into quite a bit of issues if it was not exempt from that.
All right, and another different question. In the application, you must specify which uses you will use the funds for. Once receiving an award, will CDFIs be able to switch uses without getting approval, like in FA or RP?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, you will. So in general, we're trying to structure that portion of the program much like FA and RRP. One area of difference in terms of performance goals, because I didn't really talk about this in my intro remark, is one of the things we're looking for is folks to commit to doing one of the policy priorities, and these are listed in question 12 of the application. One policy priority you can commit to is investing in native areas. And then there are other options as well. And so that's going to be something we look at. So the policy priority you commit to, that's going to be, so the policy priority you commit to in question 5, that's not going to be something you can change without seeking an amendment. But other stuff in terms of uses of funds, specific business types, you would have some flexibility to move those around as with FA or RRP.
Okay. So those are the questions we have in the chat. I wanted to invite anyone, if I really messed up your question in some way, or if you needed any additional clarification on the question you asked, if you would like to go ahead and you could unmute yourself and come in and join the conversation, or put some additional clarifying questions in the chat for us. We still have a little time to do that. We do have one that just popped up, Dan, for native CDFIs who are serving tribes without reservations, but that do not have, sorry, say it again. Serving tribes without reservations, but that do have tribally designated service areas, not statistically designated areas. Will these service areas count as native areas?
So Pete and I had a conversation about that yesterday, and it's something we're looking into. I would encourage anyone affected by that issue to submit a service request, and we can follow up with you directly, potentially for more information. So I do have, yeah, so it's something we're going to discuss internally and come up with an answer to.
Okay. All right, those are all the questions we have in the chat. Pete, did you have any additional, or does anyone want to come off mute and join?
I think the only thing that I would recommend to everyone is if you do have questions, for Dan or the CDFI fund, do respond through the service request. And it seems like my phone this week has blown up with the last question that was asked there, because there are several tribes due to the Restoration Acts of the 90s that operate in service counties, and which is a reservation base. So, please reach out to Dan and one-on-one to get those questions answered from him directly. That'd be great.
I did see one more question come in on the chat, Kristen, about matching. So this program does not have a matching requirement or matching funds requirement. You can commit to, and this is an option, one of the policy priorities is that you commit to, increasing your award in ERP eligible geographies by a multiplier of the award amount, which, you have to raise other money to do that. But there are 4 other options that don't involve raising other money at all. It's just spending the ERP award in your geographies. So.
Dan, I have a question for you. Like on the when you at the CDFI fund to make a determination and maybe are going to change, let's say, the deadline date, or even let's say the service county issue. What is the turnaround time basically on those decisions? Is it a month or 6 weeks or?
We try to be a little faster when the round is open.
Okay.
So part of the reason on the service county front, I want to hear from folks specifically as to what the issue is like I need to get a sense of, is it an eligibility issue or going forward uses of the award issue? Because that will tell us how long a time frame we have to address the issue. You know, if it's a few folks and they're able to qualify as eligible using other standards, that might give us a little longer to address the issue than otherwise. So that's part of why I asked folks to reach out to us directly. Because yeah, and it is, things do come in quickly, particularly with a new program, and that there is pressure to turn things around so folks can have the information accurate to apply. And so depending on the complexity of the issue, we can turn around in a week. Sometimes it takes 2 weeks. For working on these supplemental frequently asked questions, that will take probably 6 weeks in total before it's released. Maybe a little less. I'm hoping still a little less. Yeah, it just depends on the complexity of the issue and how many people need to be involved in making that decision. You know, because the federal government has many voices. So, you know, it takes time to hear all of them.
Anyone else have a burning desire to come off mute and ask any questions while we've got Dan's team available? Nope. I appreciate your time today, Dan, and thank you for being so flexible with taking my calls and communicating with us. You've been very workable working around our schedule, so thank you.
Yeah, and again, you know, please don't hesitate to submit a service request if you have a question about something that comes up. We also have an email address, but to be perfectly honest, all the emails, if you send us an email, that just means that we create a service request ourselves from your email. So it's quicker and it's better in our data management if you just create it yourself. So, you know, and we can certainly get on the phone and talk through more complex issues if that's the case. But, you know, don't be afraid to ask questions if things come up. There's no question that's too simple that we're not happy to answer. You know, we recognize there's some complexity to this program, and then there are a lot of different reasons for that. You know, but we want to make sure folks get access to the program and have access to the resources. It is intended to flow to communities that maybe had trouble accessing some of the earlier stages of COVID release funds, you know, and we're committed to making sure that happens. So, you know, one way we want to make sure we do that is to try to provide guidance and clarity up front. So if there are issues you're having, please don't hesitate to reach out.
All right, I thank you. And we will have a recording available of this webinar on our website, and it'll be more than likely tomorrow, right, Kristen? Possibly.
Yeah, we'll have it up by tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Hope you all have a great day.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.